Mr. Jr, you've been charged with multiple counts of murder in the first degree, contrary to section 125.27 of the penal law. There should be a copy of the charges in front of you. Do you understand that, sir?
Yes, sir.
Okay. Do you need me to read the charges to you, or do you understand your charges?
I understand my charges.
Okay. And can you afford an attorney?
No.
Mr. Parker?
Judge, I've been appointed to represent Mr. Gendron, and I accept that appointment.
Okay.
As far as any further reading of the felony complaint, I would waive that at this point and enter a plea of not guilty on behalf of my client.
Thank you.
There's Peyton Gendron, the terrorist who went into that Buffalo grocery store and targeted Black Americans and killed 10 folks. From that point, ever since we saw that happen, the House, the Congress has passed a bill that would look to prevent domestic terrorism from happening like this, as we've seen the influx of this going on, from more people like Peyton Gendron from making their plans actually reality. Now, with that being said, the Senate now has to look up this bill, and Senate Republicans have come out very forcefully and vehemently against the idea of preventing more attacks like this. And I was gonna say it makes you wonder why, but it actually doesn't, because Josh Hawley led the charge against this, is what he said. It sounds terrible, is what Josh Hawley said of this House passed bill, predicting that it won't get 10 Republicans in the Senate. Nice prediction. It's like the disinformation board on steroids. Another way to look at it is the Patriot Act for American citizens, he added. Senator Ron Johnson, also a senior member of the Homeland Security Committee, said that law enforcement is already supposed to be tracking domestic terrorism threats. The Democrats can't even wait an hour before they blame the Republicans for the Buffalo shooting. And I think it's despicable. That's what Ron Johnson said. So we got Hawley and Johnson talking about how terrible and despicable this potential bill is, or this bill was passed in the House, but this bill would be to stop domestic terrorists, monitor, make sure, track, and see these folks and stop them doing before they do what they're planning to do. Because as we know, there's this influx of these white nationalist terrorists. So I wonder if terrible and despicable are the kinds of words that they used when this was happening.
Jews will not replace us! Jews will not replace us! Jews will not replace us!
After they found no issue with that being terrible and despicable, maybe they found this terrible and despicable.
Go.
Not very terrible and despicable, apparently, according to Josh Hawley and Ron Johnson. Weird how that works. But there's more info on this. So there's some Senate Republicans that see this domestic terrorism bill as just another attempt to target the right and point to calls the Democrats made in the wake of the January 6th attack on the Capitol to begin monitoring groups on the right as potential domestic terrorism threats. I want you guys to remember that part, because they're saying this is similar to what Democrats said after January 6th. Ron Johnson again said there's a huge double standard between calls by Democrats to authorize federal law enforcement to track extreme speech when it comes from groups on the right compared to groups on the left. So this is the same Ron Johnson that is worried about how Democrats are gonna use this the same way they used January 6th to come after right-wing groups. Weird, because a lot of Republicans said that it wasn't right-wing groups. Also, this guy that looks a lot like Ron Johnson said it, watch.
Although the crowd represented a broad cross-section of Americans, mostly working class by their appearance and manner of speech, some people stood out. A very few didn't share the jovial, friendly, earnest demeanor of the great majority. Some obviously didn't fit in, and he describes 4 different types of people: plainclothes militants, agents provocateurs, fake Trump protesters, and then disciplined, uniformed column of attackers. I think these are the people that probably planned this. When we crossed First Street Northwest to enter the Capitol grounds where the Capitol Police had jurisdiction, I noticed no police at all. Several marchers expressed surprise. The openness seemed like a courtesy gesture from Congress, which controls security.
So apparently Democrats infiltrated this MAGA party and ran up in the Capitol, and the police were on board with them and let them in because the Democrats were in charge of security at the Capitol. In other words, it was elected officials of all Democrats and also somehow left-leaning folks in the country posing as Trumpers. So how does this bill passed by the House to go after right-wing terrorism, how does that have anything to do with what you said wasn't right-wing terrorism? Just trying to figure this whole thing out. It doesn't matter, he just talks from both sides of his mouth, and to make sure as anybody who follows and believes anything he says is still confused. More about what's actually in this terrible and horrific bill. So the Domestic Terrorism Prevention Act would set up offices specifically focused on domestic terrorism at the Department of Homeland Security, the Department of Justice, and the FBI. The offices would track and analyze domestic terrorist activity with the goal of better preparing the federal government to identify risks in order to take preventative action. And the bill creates a requirement for biannual reporting on domestic terrorism threats. It also calls for assessments of the threat posed specifically by the white supremacists and neo-Nazis, Jackson. So you can have the argument that, hey, maybe we shouldn't be monitoring people in a certain way. We've had those arguments, especially when it came to, as you mentioned, the Patriot Act and people being seen and monitored and trying to figure out what is and they are and not doing. But what we're not doing so far is even tracking and pointing out that these things are on the rise. We see it, but we don't accept it as officials in office or passing legislation to do it. And last thing, Jackson, from me is Ron Johnson said that we already have things in place that will stop people. Why haven't those levers stopped people yet? Now, sometimes we do break up militias that are trying to kidnap governors of entire states here. Those get broken up, but we still have these attacks that are on the rise because they're being fueled by politicians and pundits, because that's just what they think they're supposed to be doing here.
So I think what's important is that the Republican Party, blocking these types of bills in the Senate and then being adamantly against doing anything about, any type of surveillance is encouraging more of this behavior, and they know it. And the reason is because the Republican Party's agenda is so vastly unpopular, at least among the general populace, with things like taking abortion away, not being in favor of the middle class, basically. The more they can have people focused on culture wars, or the more chaos can be going throughout the country in general, allows them to operate better. So they're just protecting their offices, they're just protecting their base, and in doing so, they're encouraging more of it. And one of the things that Josh Hawley went on to say that really got under my skin was just the words he used when he said he's completely against this, which means no parameters, no regulations. It's just a zero-sum game. Either, it's 1984 and you're completely surveilling everybody, like from what's the name? I don't even remember his name, but just that book where you're just completely, George Orwell, you're completely surveilling everybody, or you're not, when in reality, many of these killers are online putting out manifestos about what they will do. And so, if there's no parameters at all, it's just encouragement. That's all.
Yeah, I would like for them to talk about the things that are put in place to stop things like this. But by the way, I do understand the issue with worrying about people being surveilled, because that's what's happening a lot in the country. Now, if you have an issue with it, maybe these folks that are making these laws can work through how to protect those levers. So if we're looking for accountability and transparency in how they do this and not be a wide open spread of just monitoring Americans, work on that. But that's not what they're talking about. They're saying they're targeting the right wing, and I can't believe it because that's so unfair. Why don't they target the left wing, considering what happened in 2020 and all the protests and riots that happened in the summer of 2020? What were those protests and riots about? There's a difference here in what people are protesting, what people want to see changing in their country. This is all based off of nonsense, and there's no facts that back up what it is that they're saying, because the facts keep changing, as Ron Johnson already pointed out.